Well, welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. We're glad to have you here. For those of you that are watching us live, we just thank you for that and let you know that you can make comments and ask questions as we're going along. And for those of you that are watching the recorded session of this video, we thank you for watching either on our YouTube channel or on Facebook. And for those of you who are listening on our podcast, we have a very special guest tonight again. Andrew Pudewa is with us from IEW, the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and I'm going to have him give an introduction of himself because I know that there's a lot of background about you that maybe a lot of people don't even know about special education, and we talked about that I think in the past, but so why don't you let our audience kind of know a little bit of your background? And I know they probably recognize you from the IEW videos. I know that's where I was first introduced to you as we bought that curriculum for my oldest son. But I just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight and to share some of your wisdom.
Sure, it's a great pleasure. I know that when we first started talking, and I'm not sure what conference that was.
I think it was in Russia.
Remember where we met?
Yeah,
it was in Russia. Okay.
Yeah, we were I think in the airport.
And then we met again a couple times in different cities in the summer, and just an immediate connection. I have so much respect for what you're trying to do with your organization, and so I'm glad we could make this work. Yeah, I have a little bit of an unusual educational history. Oddly, my primary training is as a violin teacher.
Wow.
So I kind of stumbled into this teaching writing business, which of course, has worked well, and I've enjoyed tremendously. But I originally went to Japan to study with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki of the Suzuki method.
Yeah.
In 1882. And I lived in Japan for 3 years, and I studied with Dr. Suzuki pretty much every day. He would teach group lessons 9 to 11, 7 days a week when he was in town. The only time we got a respite is when he was off traveling the world, teaching elsewhere. He was young, 81 at the time I got there, and a tremendous man. But one of the things, about Suzuki is that in his very initial beginning, his very beginning of teaching music, he came into some awarenesses because of a father who brought a blind child to him and said, "Can you teach my son to play the violin?" And Suzuki said, "Well, I don't know. I'll try."
Exactly.
And, so that was interesting because now you had a child who you could not use printed music with.
Right, exactly.
And so he had to learn by ear. And that was in great part what brought Suzuki to the understanding that very young children could learn to play a musical instrument before they could even read music, decode. And so he developed what he originally called the mother tongue method of education. And that over the decades morphed into, in Japanese, Saino Kyoiku, which translates loosely as ability development or talent education. And then, of course, we in the Western world know this more as Suzuki method. But the real essence of what he was all about is every child can learn. Every child can learn. And of course, that's what we're all about in homeschooling, and especially when we have children across a wide range of aptitudes and abilities and neurological challenges. But, he believed firmly every child could learn. And he seemed to be particularly delighted with children who had difficulties or handicaps. He taught, crippled children. He taught children who were missing fingers on one of their hands. He taught blind kids. He taught Down syndrome kids. And he really lived that and transferred that to us as teacher
As
trainees.
students, yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
So
Well, I'm sure it made you look at things differently than you probably ever had before, and to try to solve, how can I get this content delivered in a different way for this child?
Yeah. And he viewed that as, what the parent, primarily the parent, with the help of the teacher could do. He was, revolutionary in many ways. Not just was he willing to teach, a blind child by a listening method, he viewed the parent as the primary teacher.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that went totally against the grain of the world of music education at the time, which was kind of dominated by experts who, nobody else could teach a kid unless you were a professional. And he said, no, you can teach a mother to teach a child. And so that was kind of, long before I was married or had kids. I'm just a, dumb little 23-year-old who doesn't know much about real life. But it always struck me, the dedication of mothers in Japan. So it was interesting because when I was there in Japan, I read an article. It was given to me by one of the students that I was in school with. She had worked as a translator for some of Dr. Suzuki's writings. She was Japanese American, totally bilingual girl. And she gave me an article that was an interview between Dr. Glenn Bowman and Shinichi Suzuki. And it just, it blew my mind. I read it and I just thought, wow, this is incredible. Here's two men on the opposite sides of the world working in a very similar way, teaching parents programs that would allow their children of any range of ability or aptitude to excel.
Wow. Yeah. And that collaborative effort, when we start doing those types of things, helps us to even better what we're doing, because we can share ideas from a different discipline, but yet, still build on those. And we're seeing that in our own organization, but it's amazing that, you can translate that, and you've translated now to music, to writing, and helping kids in that way. And so I'm sure that influenced a lot of how you started doing instruction.
Yeah, I read that article and I thought, this is incredible. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to graduate here from the Talent Education Institute. I could go anywhere in the world and do anything that I thought I wanted. And when I read that article with Glenn Doman, I thought, I got to go to Philadelphia. It was just absolute. That's where I'm called. And I wrote to them and I said, I'm very interested in what you do. They have two things going on at Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential. They had one was what I was initially interested in because of that article, was called the Better Baby Institute and the International School, where they had children that were kind of on an accelerated program, applying principles of neurological growth. But then they had another whole area that was their primary area, working with brain injured children. So I wrote to them, said, I'm very interested in what you're doing, and I'm going to graduate from the Talent Education Institute. Do you need a violin teacher? And they wrote back and said, no, we don't really need a violin teacher. We have a couple, but we are interested in young people who are interested in what we're doing. So if you'd like to, we're going to have a team in Tokyo seeing kids who are on our program in a couple months, and you can come visit us. This is where we'll be. And so I thought, well, that's the Lord speaking to me right there.
Right, exactly.
So I went.
Wonderful open door.
I went to Tokyo, about 4.5 hours by slow train for starving students.
You're right.
And I for the first time in my life met a whole building full, essentially, of brain injured children and their families. you know,
Wow.
everything from cerebral palsy to, you know, mildly autistic to blind and deaf and paralyzed. I mean, the whole gamut. And it was just so incredible for me. It was just a life-changing experience. They put me to work right away. I acquired a little bit of Japanese fluency. So they said, well, here, you help translate. We won't make do anything technical, but you can, you know, do this. And you can sit in and you know, listen to the histories and watch our staff teach programs. And I left that week in Japan and I said, I don't care if I ever teach violin again in my life.
Wow.
I have got to go and work with these people.
You just knew your passion. Yeah.
It was clear. And I went, so I did. I went to Philadelphia and they basically had a program where you don't get paid. It's
kind of like my interns right now. They do all hard graphic design and video editing for nothing. And I said, someday we hope to pay you. Yes.
They gave me room and board. They gave me a small stipend for toothpaste. And I worked 9-10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days every week. But I learned so much. And eventually it happened that their violin teacher left. And so I was working both in the clinic with the brain injured kids and their families most of the time. But then I had a dozen or so violin students, and I started to work with the accelerated kids in the international school. And it was all going on in the same campus. Wow. And so I lived there, worked there, read there, taught there, got mentored there. And 3 years, it was an incredible experience. And I think I would still be there to this day if, you know, destiny in the form of family problems had not caused me to have to leave. I was very sad to leave. But, you know, in retrospect, you know, God has the plan for all of us. We just never know what it is until oftentimes way after the fact.
Oh, yes, exactly. You kind of see it all fall into place.
But so I left Philadelphia with these two, you know, major chunks of knowledge and experience to some degree, Suzuki method and child brain development. And then I moved to Montana and I started a little preschool, and I worked part-time in a school where there was a Canadian teacher who said, oh, there's this great phonics-based reading and writing program, and it's the best thing there is, and we should all go learn it. And all we have to do is go to Canada for 2 weeks this summer. And she was so enthusiastic. She convinced the entire staff, essentially the whole faculty of the school, of which I was a part, to go. So I went up to northern Alberta for 2 weeks. I learned the structure and style writing program from Dr. James Webster. And as soon as I started learning this thing, I thought, oh, that is a Suzuki method for teaching English composition.
Wow.
And so I came back, I worked for the school a little bit more. I kept teaching some writing classes, mainly to homeschool kids on the side. We'd started to homeschool at that time. And so that kind of continued on. I ended up going back to Canada every summer for many years and became Dr. Webster's kind of assistant, first slave, then assistant, then protege. And he's still a good friend of mine. He's 92 years old, and I was just in Vancouver with him 5 days ago.
I was going to say, we're in Canada. Yeah, that's
we were in Alberta. He's in Vancouver, retired now, of course, at 92. But he still writes, like, if I send him something I've written, he'll give me a 2-page critique of everything.
Oh, wow. So he's got all his mental faculties still.
Oh, my gosh. He's sharp. His memory, in many ways, is better than mine. Wow. And his whole family's lived very long. So I don't, you know, I don't claim to, and this is important, you know, I don't claim to have really invented anything that I teach people. I'm simply been a place where
a very good student.
Ideas
you can assimilate it well.
Yeah, and I've been able to represent those And of course, I've been full-time at it for almost 20 years now, and I've had the great privilege of meeting, homeschool parents from all over the world. I was in New Zealand a month and a half ago, doing some work with homeschoolers there. Of course,
Wow.
this, wherever you go in the world and you meet parents, you meet parents who have children with challenges.
Exactly. Yes.
In fact, I'm wondering, what do you think the statistics are that if you have like 4 kids, there's a 90% chance you'll have one of them that's got some problem? Would you think it's that high or higher?
Yes.
Maybe?
Yeah, I think we're looking right now at about a 33% for if we consider the whole spectrum of difficulties. What the schools consider right now is between a 13 to 14% range of diagnostic disabilities. Yeah.
So, of course, in the world of writing, I'm less likely to meet kids with, severe problems.
Right.
But of course, I do bump into most frequently kids with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and some auditory processing issues, spectrum disorders.
Right.
And then sometimes kids who have more than one of those all combined together, So I kind of developed a way of directing and helping people, and I've referred many people to you, and your resources are broad and so available. And I really, like I said at the beginning, I really respect what you've been doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I like I said, when my first introduction to you was turning on a video for my son who is on the spectrum, and your methodology for teaching was so good for him because he is such a concrete thinker, and to be able to give him steps and things like that. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that, but for students who have issues, to break things down into simpler steps, especially for us as parents who don't always think of every single step we need to do because we've made it automatic in our own lives. And so, to have somebody who can look at it from that perspective and say, well, these are the steps to get to that place where you're expecting your child to naturally be, and they aren't. So we have one question I'm going to throw up here.
Okay.
Before we get started. It says, we're going to be joining a local co-op's IEW program mid-year, and with my 10-year-old daughter. Any tips on keeping her encouraged as she struggles with dyslexia and dysgraphia, and writing is a huge struggle for her? So that's a good question, because when kids get into a classroom environment, all of a sudden that comparison kicks in, and that sometimes makes it more difficult as well.
It does. The first thing to consider is the teacher aware, and does the teacher have, is whoever's running that class, that co-op class she's going to be in, are they aware, and do they understand how to create a space where that child is going to be comfortable?
Right, and also not comparisons and
obviously one of the problems that a lot of kids with the visual issues have is just keeping up. Everything can be a little slower, take a little longer. They can't look at a word and copy it. They have to, look at a letter and copy it, and look at the next letter and then the letters get mixed up, and then their copying gets mixed up, and they get frustrated, and then they want to erase it and do it again. And meanwhile, the teacher's just charging on, with a keyword outline on that board. And unlike a video, you can't pause as a live teacher at your convenience. So, I'll tell you, I don't know, if this person, Quell, has a relationship with the teacher is going to do it. But I've developed the technique when teaching in groups to keep an eye on every child and be sure they're kind of keeping up with me. And if someone's, taking a little longer, to just get the words on paper, just copy from the board or do whatever, I will often kind of stall. I will, you know, have a side conversation, bring in some trivia or interesting facts, or ask some kids some related but not essential questions to try to give time for those, you know, 1, 2, 3, 5 kids, however, because you don't want them saying, wait, and then everybody's just waiting. That's
and then they know why they're waiting, and that's embarrassing.
I feel like I should do, maybe that's a podcast that I could do on my end, but you know, tips for teaching in classes and co-ops with kids with mixed ability levels. So, you know, that's one thing. And then, of course, the homeschool co-op is a much friendlier place than your typical classroom.
Exactly.
In that most homeschool co-ops are okay, you know, if mom needs to be in the room with the child, you know, even sit next to the child, even do a little bit of scribing or secretarial work for the child so that they can, you know, keep up and get it. You know, that's usually okay.
We've also had shared with us, one of my team members says that she often has another child, the teacher makes a copy of someone else's work that then they share with them, or the teacher already has the notes and makes a copy for that student. So they can look like they're writing, and yet they still don't fall behind.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a very good one. One little caution to moms. This is going to sound funny, maybe not. I've watched some mothers scribe for their child who needs a secretary, only her writing is not legible by the child because
I would be guilty of that. I can't even read my own writing.
Got some cursive hybrid thing, and so I always say, now if you do this, if you be your child's secretary, you know, slow down, print, be sure that it's legible by them. Otherwise that could be even more frustrating. It's like, well, mom's writing everything down and I don't even know what she's writing. I can't even read it. So just a funny thing, because a lot of moms wouldn't stop to think about that. But
and a couple episodes ago, I had somebody on that was talking about the text to speech, or speech to text, that is so good right now. I actually scribed my last blog halfway into my phone by talking because it works so well. So, so definitely, if you don't have legible handwriting, look into something like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the in-class dynamic first. And that might not work there, but of course at home, then yes, there's assistive technology, and I tell you, it is phenomenal how good these phones are.
I know, and it's free. We've got it with us all the time now.
Yeah, amazing. But yeah, so at home, Coel, when you're helping your daughter, you probably in a co-op class, it's usually they'll have, you know, 45 minutes, hour, maybe even an hour and 15 for the writing thing. If you're trying to squeeze in grammar or literature, it can be less. So there's usually homework. They usually get the kids set up, you know, here's the keyword outline, here's the checklist, here's a few ideas, and now go home and write this thing. So now with child at home, you can take a variety of approaches. One approach is child dictates and you write it down legibly, exactly the way they say it, read it together, try to edit it together, and then hopefully the child has enough ability to transcribe that themselves into a final copy. If they do, that gives them a sense that, yes, I did this, this is mine. If they don't, then maybe they could type it, and that would be an option as well. I do recommend, in terms of helping a child, that you know, if they type it or you type it exactly as they say, or they type it, print it out, and then mark it with a pen or colored pen, and make, you know, double space, so you have plenty of room. Make any changes or edits or corrections that are needed, and then let the child go back to the computer, look at the corrected paper, implement those changes on the screen, and then print out a final one. That's a better process than having mom sit at the computer and try to edit it on screen while they're doing it. I think
Right.
more learning occurs that way.
Yes, definitely, because they have to read the wrong, or the way that it doesn't. I like it when my stuff gets edited. I learn a lot while that happens too. So we had one person say that they use Google Docs at home with their papers, and I know my college student does this. He sends his papers via Google Docs, and I am allowed to edit it as a suggestion. So he still sees, what was there is his and what was mine. But yes, Google Docs are awesome for sharing in families. And also that tech interview I did, she talked about how to set up an account for younger kids, a family account. So if your kids are under, I think, 16, you need to do that. But
Okay.
And so our first question, Coel said that, thank you. I'm feeling a little less afraid now.
Oh,
So,
good. Glad to hear it.
Great encouragement. And then Tracy had a question. She said, our co-op teacher allows my two girls to sit next to each other. One has dysgraphia, one has dyslexia. Everyone else has an assigned seat, but they're allowed to sit by one another because they work together also. I just take photos of the board at the end of class for my girls, and they're allowed to type their papers, which is a huge help. So
good. That's
some additional suggestions. Yeah, those are great. So our topic tonight is dyslexia and dysgraphia, which those have kind of been the questions, probably because the parents knew that we were going to be talking about that. But what types of things should parents be aware of that dyslexia and dysgraphia, and I'm sure there is some crossover in that of issues with writing, because sometimes we just think our child's lazy because they're not doing something that it really is related to something that they're struggling with. And so what types of things should parents be aware of that this is kind of a roadblock in writing for children who have these issues?
Yeah, well, if I could back up just a little bit, and I have been thinking about how complex the whole idea of writing is. I mean,
Exactly.
actually, if you were an atheist and you just thought about the fact that human beings can write, it might cause you to believe that it couldn't be accidental because it's just so incredibly complicated. So think about it. To write something, first, you have to have an idea.
Right.
This idea can exist outside your mind as a source text or an article or information that exists, or it can exist inside your mind from an experience or a memory or an imagination.
Right.
That idea has to then go into language. So if it's a memory, it's probably a sensory memory, somewhat abstract. And you have to extract that and then apply the language function to translate it into words.
Right.
If it's an external idea and it came from words, you read it or heard it, that's a little easier to begin with, which is why we, of course, at IEW begin with, Unit 1 and 2, source text. But either way, that idea has to exist, and that idea has to get into words. To do that, a child has to use their language function, right? They have to essentially say that either verbally or internally. They have to say it. Yeah, they have to say something. So that's a language function. So if you see something, you see it and you say, "Oh, what I see is a dog chasing a squirrel," right? A big dog chasing a little squirrel, a big dog chasing a little squirrel across the green grass, a big dog chasing a little squirrel across the green grass over to the tree, and so your processing capacity, you have to have the words, you have to have the vocabulary to translate the idea into, and then you've got to have the intrinsic language function, the mother tongue, to be able to produce a sentence has the syntax that carries the meaning, with words in the right order, the right ends, and all that. Okay, so you have to essentially have an idea, say it to yourself. Then you have to hear what you said to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to remember what you heard yourself say to yourself long enough to get the first word on paper.
So we have short-term memory. Yeah, exactly.
Everything. It's just all, and then you've got to go access spelling information to get that word. And maybe you may or may not have stored that spelling information. It may or may not be easily retrievable. And sometimes you have to go so far into your spelling part of your brain. By the time you get the word, you forgot what you heard yourself say to yourself. Okay?
Exactly.
Then, if you're dyslexic or dysgraphic, on top of that, you've got to get the spelling information from your probably your auditory storage of that, if you have it, and say the letters and get them in the right order, and then also remember which way the darn B's and the D's go. Right? And then you're going like,
exactly.
Is it this one or that one? You're trying to remember all those tricks. And you know, and by the time you got a word or two, you very often have to go back to the whole beginning of that process, reconstruct the language, say it to yourself, hear it, remember what you heard, figure out what you just wrote, get to the next word. When I contemplate this, I really do think it's a miracle any of us can do this at all.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And you do, when you break it down like that, it's like, well, that only the most talented people in the world can be adequate at this.
Yeah, but then again, you know, we all are, but it just does underscore the fact that it's an extremely complex, high-level neurological function. So for parents, you know, who are working with kids that are having trouble learning to write, you want to look at that whole process and see, well, where are some of the blockages? Is it in the vocabulary? Because that can happen. Kids just simply don't have words to describe what they remember, see, or imagine.
Exactly.
With keyword outlines, we go a long ways to help the kids. You don't have to find the words. You can pull them out of a source text, put them in an outline now. At least that part's, you know, done. How about then syntax? You know, kids who have, you know, auditory impairments, or I meet a lot of kids who are adopted, and so English is not their first language. So they're working with ESL. They may have a neurological problem on top of that, and they may not actually be confident in the English syntax, in the sentence they're creating. You know, how do we know if a sentence is right or wrong? We run it against the database of all known sentences.
We've heard and how we speak, and that's not always correct.
Yeah, well, and young children, they don't have a fully developed database of correct English, and then it's with language or processing issues. So, so that's another thing. Then, of course, memory, right? There's auditory processing and memory issues, and then there's the dyslexic dysgraphic. So the first thing I would say to parents is, you know, find out where the blockage is, find out where the tough spot is, or find out perhaps if there's more than one tough spot, and then build bridges there. Build bridges there. If the difficulty,
there's, you know, steps like how you break down in your curriculum. That really helps. It helped me when I was teaching my son, because it showed me where he struggled, but yet I could say, oh, it's this area of the process, because you've broken it down into a process. And so it wasn't like just this ambiguous, you know, okay, we're just writing a paper and we're going to write about this. But there were certain steps that we had to go through, and I knew when we hit certain places that it was going to take us longer. And so that's you know, a good point for. And
that's why we get such a, you know, we get such a excellent result. You know, we get all the time parents who've got dyslexic, dysgraphic kids who say, wow, this is the first thing that's really worked, because of the very tight modeling. That's what builds the bridge. You know,
Right.
if the problem is vocabulary, give the kids the word. If the problem is
Mm-hmm.
syntax, model it. If the problem is memory, make that available. That, you know, the keyword outlines help so much
Mm-hmm.
there. If the problem is manual function, okay, then use accommodating adaptive technology or assistive work by the parent. If the problem is spelling, okay, teach that in isolation, and then you know it works well. One of the things too is, you know, kids, parents who have kids with really serious problems, in a way, are less stressed than parents who have kids with mild problems. Do you find that true?
Yes, because you don't see it. It's, you know, those hidden disabilities that naturally our parental reaction is they're just being lazy, because we don't see the behind, you know, it. Even though we even maybe have the diagnosis, we still think, well, you know, they're doing good in other things, or maybe they're succeeding in other subjects as well. Because my son that's on the autism spectrum, he was doing calculus at 16, but yet he didn't write a paper for me his entire high school career, even using IEW. I mean, we got parts, but I have to tell you, he got A's in English in college because he knows how to write. But he just never wrote for me. So, but yes, it was, you know, and so I think that's what we tend to do is we kind of lump them in with, well, you're doing good at everything else. Why don't you do good with this? And I've given you all the things that you need to. We forget that every time they get to those points, that's still a stumbling block, even though we've got them through it in the past.
Yeah, and getting away from that problem of comparing kids with other kids based on age. You know, my 10-year-old is doing what other people's 10-year-olds are doing, or, you know, I think my 7th grader is behind. I'm sure you and I have very similar conversations with parents, and try to point out that it really doesn't matter where a child is in relation to other people's children. What matters is, is this child growing, making progress, improving skills in relation to themselves. So, you know, that's one of the huge benefits of homeschooling, is they're not in that environment where everybody is age segregated. But even homeschoolers have that kind of, you know, fear that, oh no, my, you know, 12-year-old kid is not doing what someone else's 12-year-old kid is doing. This is why my background as a music teacher has been so helpful. Because the interesting thing there is music teachers we never compare children based on age.
No, because they all start the instruments at different times.
Yeah, you can start when you're 4 or 10 or 14 or 40. It doesn't matter. We never judge based on, well, you know, did they get through book 1 in a year? You know, you can get through book 1 in 6 months. You can get through book 1 in 2 years. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you make progress and move through book 1 and move into book 2. And of course, you know, we've never done stupid things like give grades, letter grades, or all that. So I always, you know, I've always
unless
said,
you're teaching music in a school.
well, that's a whole different set of problems. But one of the things I always say is the whole world would be better if all teachers were music teachers first and had that understanding that all children are different. And so that's, you know, that's one conversation that often has to happen with the, you know, people. The kid's smart, but then he can't do what you think he should be able to do. And I'm sure you've come across, Peggy, Levine's book, The Myth of the Lazy Child.
Yes.
Or The Myth of Laziness. I can't remember which it is. I don't agree with 100% in that book, but I think it's an important thing to realize that, you know, children by their nature are, 1, industrious, 2, they want to make you happy. I mean, they really do. That they want. I don't think any boy ever woke up in the morning and said, how can I really drive my mom crazy today? No, I mean, they probably wake up and say, oh God, help me not irritate my mother.
Right.
So they want to please parents and teachers, and we have to be careful not to fall into kind of the mentality that, you know, they're lazy until proven not, or, you know, they're, you know, kids in school, you know, instead, what if we just trusted children that they were always doing their best and helped them succeed in that, you know? And I'm not saying, you know, we're not sinful creatures and that we don't all have, you know, concupiscence and imperfections, but when we're looking at motivation, right? I think
Yes,
there's
and that's
so
exactly
much
it.
there. And just the power of encouragement. You know, that's another thing I learned from Dr. Suzuki. He was just the consummate encourager. He believed in everybody. He always had something positive to say. I mean, he could be very very critical. I mean, his critiques were not held back, but they were always tempered with this love that kind of oozed out of him. And I've noticed in my life, there are times when I have felt it's easier for me to be unconditionally supportive and loving and enthusiastic about other people's children's efforts. And,
yes.
and forget to be that way with my own. It's like, yeah, you and me, I love you, we know this. So would you just do better now?
You get to that frustration point, I think, and it's, yeah, it kind of wears on you both. But yeah, we forget that ourselves, when we do something that motivates us, we can do it faster and better, even though that we're using those same skills in something that doesn't motivate us. It takes much more willpower within us to do it. And so a lot of times our assignments that we give our kids that are related to things that we want them to do that has no motivation underneath it for them at all, is going to take a lot more of their internal willpower to do.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I couldn't figure out for the longest time. My son is dyslexic, and you know, he can't read a book, but yet he can sit for 2 hours and watch a movie with the you know, and read. It's a foreign movie with all the subtitles underneath. That's not a problem. So, but again, it's the motivation behind it. He wants to understand the movie, so he's reading it. And
you know, that you mentioned, though, that brings another thought to my mind, which I often pass on to the parents of dyslexic, dysgraphic kids, or, you know, sometimes there's other visual problems that are interpreted as dyslexia, but they could be laterality issues, right? Dominance, eye dominance, convergence of vision issues. But one thing that I think we will notice with published curricular materials, stuff for little kids, you know, grade 1, 2, it's all, you know, 24-point font, 20-point font. It's nice and big and spread out. And then for some reason, it seems like right at grade 3, everything just shrinks down. You know, now everybody should be able to read, you know, single space 12-point font or whatever. And so I always encourage parents to get, and you know, technology in many ways is wonderful because it's so cheap, and you can buy for a couple $100 a machine that will now enlarge, photocopy machine. And so if you've got something a child needs to read and the text is small, you know, oftentimes just making it bigger makes it easier, and it's, you know, so helpful. So I'm often, maybe one reason your son would read movie subtitles was, yes, maybe it was more interesting, maybe it looked like, you know, an illustrated story, there was action. But think about the size of the letters, much larger and easier to see. Also, in isolation, you know, a line or two at a time. And,
Right.
you know, kids get lost in a whole page
It's like a
of
sea of word
letters,
or letters. Yes.
yeah, that are so close together. So, you know, that's also one thing to consider is, can you just make everything a little bigger? Even, you know, with a child, dyslexic, it's easier for them to write on the whiteboard in many cases than on a piece of paper with a pen in little tiny lines. So sometimes just doing everything bigger can help a great deal with that visual complexity and overwhelm that is so possible.
That's great advice. I've got some questions if you're okay with us switching gears.
Yeah, let's go for some questions.
Okay. This is a big one. Tammy says, I have a few questions. My 13-year-old is able to write a paragraph and understands how to add the dress-ups now. I'm assuming she's talking about your curriculum. This is the second year using IEW, but we can't seem to get beyond the one paragraph. He's trying to think of ideas of things to write about on his own. It causes him to go to a place, I don't know what to write. We tend to stick to facts and not stories. He's good at self-editing. I know a long way out, but I'm still concerned about how we will adjust when he has to write for college classes. Also, should we worry about spelling? Because he's never really improved.
Okay, that's a lot of questions, but the first thing I would ask Tammy is, when you say it's your second year with IEW, how far into the units have you been able to get? It sounds a little bit like you did unit 1 and 2, keywords from every sentence, and wrote it out, and that was fine. And then there was this jump to like, okay, now he should be able to write whatever he's thinking, which in our system would be unit 7. So it seems like if the case is you did unit 1 and 2, and then you just wanted to, you know, jump all the way to, you know, the blank brain, blank paper situation, that would not work nearly as well as if you could work through the units, because what they're designed to do is gradually move the child from dictated content to the blank page. So unit 3, you're writing stories, but you don't have to think of an original story. You can just retell an existing story. You have to, you know, add a little bit of detail. The dress-ups help require that. And then unit 4, you're back in the world of facts, which is safer. Unit 5 is written from pictures. And so that's a challenge, because you've got these pictures and there's no source text, there's no story per se, but at least there's some pictures and methodology of thinking about those pictures. And then unit 6, you're into multiple reference research. And then unit 7, it's that blank page. It's just you and your mind and whatever you carry around in it. So I would encourage Tammy, and I see,
got through most of unit 4 the first year.
Unit 4. So that's great. At least she didn't get stuck at unit 2. And so I would say, you know, trust the system. I've seen this again and again and again. Trust the system. And what happens is children reach kind of a critical mass of confidence. I'm sure you've seen this, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, can't do. And then just one day, it's like, I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like this light bulb turns on, and it's this process that they've been going through, and then all of a sudden that whatever was blocking it just moved.
Yeah, I think there's 2 convergent factors there. One is just maturity and age. And I've noticed, and I'm guessing maybe you have too, children and boys even more so.
Yes.
When they hit puberty, they get this burst of inner willpower, and they just say,
there's moms that have 12-year-old boys. I always go, oh, okay, that's the 12-year-old boy, whether your child has special needs or not. That's the problem.
Well, they are, you know, hormones after a while. But on the upside, what I noticed is that as boys get into that, you know, 12, 13, 14, what happens is they get an inner strength and power that they are then able to exercise over their neurology and kind of make their eyes and brain do what they just weren't able to a year or two ago.
Yes, I've seen that in both my boys. Definitely.
Yeah, so you've got that benefit of puberty, maturity, and just getting older and tougher. And if you keep at the system,
exactly,
if you keep doing it, then it's a critical mass thing. You do it and do it and do it and do it and do it. And it seems like the kid isn't going to get independent. And then one day they say, "Okay, Mom, I got it. Leave me alone." But you can't decide when that's going to happen.
No, exactly. Yep. Yeah, and so, I think as a parent, you just need to stay consistent. And that doesn't mean that you push it so hard that your child resists you, but it's something that you have in, their lesson plans or what they do in the week, and you just keep doing it because you know that, and it works.
Yeah. The other question, if I recall, Tammy had was about spelling. And,
yes.
Do you bother to continue to try to teach spelling to a 13-year-old boy? I don't know there's a general answer for everyone. I do know that your window to do spelling shrinks as he gets closer to about 17. Because with boys in particular, as they get older, you need more buy-in. They need to see what is the benefit, what is the reason, what's the practical purpose here for me to suffer in this way. So Timmy, I think, said in this other message, no matter what curriculum or method we use, it just doesn't stick. I'm curious to know, has she tried ours? We have a program called Excellence in Spelling, the Phonetic Zoo, and it is very different than anything else out there because it's an auditory approach to teaching spelling. And a lot of dyslexic kids, what happens is you start showing them words when they're 7, 8, 9.
Yes.
Those words are getting scrambled on the way in. If they're going to get scrambled on the way in, they're going to get scrambled on the way out. And the only way to reprogram that wrongly stored information is to get a different neurological pathway going. And
so if you do it auditory wise, I could see the benefit of that.
Yeah. So I don't know if Tammy's familiar, but if she goes to our website, iaw.com, I have about a 70-minute talk. Sounds long, but it's really quite interesting, I think, called Spelling and the Brain. And I think if she hasn't listened to that already, if she were to listen to it, it might give her a little perspective and a little hope. Okay, I see she has used Phonetic Zoo.
Yep.
Well, it
may just be a neurological issue or long-term memory issue that your son is dealing with, and that may be something that you want to just pay attention to. Is he remembering other things as well, and not, or is it just spelling? So those are some
of the one of the things that we know is that different children require different amounts of repetition, and that the key to long-term repetition, the key to long-term retention is spaced repetition. He finishes the lesson, which is a lot of repetition in a short time. That does have to be reinforced periodically, and so having a review system maybe a little more rigorous than the one we put into the program would help. But I have met adults, who said, I never learned to spell, and I am very sorry, but I just never did, and I will use technology to help me. And a lot of
I'm in that boat too.
a lot of boys find the best technology is a girlfriend who knows how to spell and will proofread their stuff for them.
That's how my brother got through college. He has severe dyslexia, and his wife read every book to him. So there are workarounds.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hopefully that's helpful for Tammy. Were there any other
Yep.
questions? when we're-
Annie had one that was kind of in the middle of this. She said, any suggestions for helping a child to not start hating writing when they realize their friends can write and they can't? I hate for him to lose his joy when he needs constant assistance. That is hard. I mean, they notice when, I know when my kids knew that they were behind in reading, that was always hard on them, and maybe it was only at church, but still they knew.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mention my son. I know I've talked to you about him in the past, but my son was the most dyslexic person that I ever met. He did not read anything. I mean, he could not read a sentence until he was almost 11 years old. He did not read a book at all of any sort until he was 12 years old. And so most of his whole, elementary education was him listening to audiobooks, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And all the math we did was verbal. I mean, there's no point of showing a kid math on paper when 13 and 31 are indecipherable from each other.
Right.
And all the spelling was verbal, and that was it. It was essentially hanging out with older siblings, being homeschooled, listening to audiobooks, doing a little bit of verbal and auditory math and spelling. And that was it. But, what happened was, when he did kind of click, it was when he was 12, there was this tremendous catch up. The first book he actually read all the way through was Bridge to Terabithia. So he never got stuck on dumb stuff like Diary of a Wimpy Kid or that drivel they give to, 8-year-olds.
Oh, I know how much you love literature. Yeah, I know my son always listened to the Narnia books. That was his stick to be until he learned to read. Yep. And
there's, those that is something I'm just constantly trying to help parents realize is because he only listened to good and great books, and because he did so in such huge quantity, when he started to read and write fluently around 14, 15, his writing was actually much more eloquent in many ways than any of
vocabulary builds. They know sentence structure. You learn it by listening to it.
Absolutely. And so in a way, he was a better, more mature, more eloquent writer in his teenage years than any of his sisters, even the ones who were reading, C.S. Lewis at 6 years old. So that's one thing I point out. The other thing that I also point out is he couldn't read, but I said, I don't care if he can read or not, he's going to write because I am the writing guy. Right. But what's he going to write? What's he going to write? What's the only thing really that he could possibly do? And that was copy work, just straight copy.
Yeah.
So I set him up around age 10 and a half, probably, to copy 100 words a day. And I created a motivational system where he got points that he could cash in for airsoft weaponry, which is his big purpose for living.
Got that too.
And he just copied every day, a little bit, 15, 20 minutes. And because there was a motivation with a potential gain as well as a potential loss, like every time you complain, you lose points. He just did it. And he did it for about a year and 4 months. And then I've got to tell you, this was one of the most amazing moments of my parenting him. One day, he was 12 years old. And he was starting to read, and I looked at his copy work for the day, and I read it, and it was a little strange. And I said, "So, did you copy this from somewhere?" He goes, "Yeah." "So this is your copy work. You copied this from somewhere." It was a little story about a boy who fell in a river, and his dog jumped in and grabbed him and pulled him to shore and saved his life, which is actually an event from my son's daily life. So I'm reading this. There's nothing wrong. It's just odd. It just seemed like, where would you ever read this? And I said to him, so you're telling me you copied this? Yes. Where did you copy it from? This was his answer. From my brain. Is that okay? And it blew my mind, because I started to see the incredible power of building the fluency of just putting words on paper.
Exactly.
And then it built that bridge. It made those neural connections. It got the fluency and confidence. And you know, at that point, the copywork kind of died, and he came into my writing classes. And like I said, he became possibly the best of all my kids. But that copywork, you know, yeah, it's not fun. No dyslexic kids want to do copywork. But if you set up a motivational system, and with boys, it's economics all the way. They want their points.
If you want to know something
about
motivation, I talked to some ABA therapists last week, and they had some great suggestions on how to build those into your homeschool. Which yes, and that's basically what it is. It's that token system to get them something that they want.
If you don't mind, I would also mention a talk that I've done at many conferences, and it's available online too. It's called Teaching Boys and Other Kids Who Would Rather Be Making Forts All Day.
Oh yes, I had two of those.
Yeah, and I think it's very helpful. About the first half or so is on some of the neurophysiological differences between boys and girls, which is, of course, a very politically incorrect thing to talk about, but you know, truth is truth.
Yes.
Yeah. And the second half is all kind of on the art and science of motivation. So that might be useful to some of the listeners as well.
Definitely. And if you don't know Andrew's website, it's iew.com. So very easy to get to. So well, we are wrapping up our time. I want to make sure that I got everyone. Jace said something, great information. I've been looking at this program, but hesitant. My son's special needs, he's verbally tells novels, but can't put it on paper. So thanks for the encouragement. So yeah, just lots of good things. I guess.
I see Rebecca was, she's asking about Barton there.
Yeah.
And I have a relationship with Susan Barton. She's actually been on our podcast, and she recommends our program after, I think, her level 3 or something. You can check, but she understands that the way we break things down into very small steps is perfectly in alignment with her approach to an intensive phonics for dyslexic kids approach. And
Barton is a reading program just for parents that don't.
But it will not cause confusion. We have lots of people who move from the Barton continuum, but in the writing they come our way. So we've got a good track record there.
Great. Well, that's awesome. Well, we thank everyone for joining us tonight. This has been great. It's a Thanksgiving week. We know it's kind of crazy, but thank you again, Andrew, for your time and just sharing with us all that you had. We've got lots of good comments, so thank you. Excellent. That's wonderful to know. Rebecca had said, and Annie had added in smart ideas about copy work. He hates it, but motivational tools will be helpful. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They'll do the work if they're motivated in the right direction. So and loved in that direction as well. So well, thank you so much for joining us and all that you had to share. We definitely could have talked for hours, but it's getting late. So
it is. Maybe we'll do it again sometime if you wish.
Definitely.
And you keep up your wonderful work at Special Needs Homeschooling there.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will meet on the road somewhere, sometime.
Yeah, who knows? Next season, next conference season, we'll see. So yeah, and so thank you all for joining us, and we thank the Learning Disabilities Foundation of America for partially funding this broadcast, and from donors like you. And next week we have a very special broadcast. Actually, I'm broadcasting from 8:45 in the morning until 10:15 at night. It is Giving Tuesday next Tuesday, and that is the biggest nonprofit fundraising day of the year. And we have some amazing donations from organizations that are giving away free curriculum, memberships, lots of stuff. And if you donate within the hours that they're giving it away, you can enter into these giveaways. And so we're trying to raise $40,000. I'll just let you know, we have a video on our Facebook page that talks about this program. We are trying to create local groups for special needs homeschooling families to meet their specific needs of respite and all. We've got lots of things on our website that talk about that and how we're going to make this happen. Because it's something that's close to our hearts, and we know these families come to us in our support group all the time and say, where do I get hooked in locally? And we unfortunately don't have resources for them. And like a parent that I got sent my way this last week, their co-op just said, we can't deal with this family. Can you talk to them and tell them that a group might be coming their way soon? And that's hard. So we don't want that to happen. And unfortunately, to about 90% of our families don't have communities. And so, anyways, if you watch my videos, you know this is close to my heart. So, so that's what we'll be doing next Tuesday. And so we'll see you here on the SPED Homeschool Facebook page, and we'll hope that Facebook doesn't shut down next Tuesday. So, so we can do that. So thank you again, Andrew, and thank you all of you for watching tonight. Good night.
Thank you, Peggy. God bless.